You're on mute. Hang on one sec. It's the Kevin Ross Emery and Ashley Olstein. Hello.
There we go. Hey, I didn't need to come off mute. You did it just fine with me. So next week when I want to take a
Just stay on mute.
you can just host it by yourself, right? You don't need me.
Exactly. How are you? I almost said good morning. That's how I am.
Well, what part of the world are you in?
Vermont. So
Oh.
It's not morning. It's the end of the day.
Okay, I get that. So, anything up in your world today? Anything going on? Anything exciting?
No, I think I'm just getting a little full moon fever. I feel like the energy is a little shifty right now, good and bad. So yeah, I'm curious to see how it's all just gonna ripple through.
Hey, if it's shifty, then just see if it wants to run for office. It will fit in.
Be a good running mate. Shifty McGee.
There we go.
Yep.
Well, you opened up the astrology thing, so I will say that we have this full moon, and what I want people to remember about a full moon is it is time that it comes. It is a time where things come to fruition, and you don't look at the last new moon. You look at the new moon 6 months ago when the new moon was in Sagittarius, because this is in Sagittarius, mutable fire means there's going to be some passion, but there's also going to be some wanting to fix things, wanting to shave things, wanting to moving things. In your case, it's in your third house. And so it's going to be moving and shaking things and wanting to fix things around communication, both internal communication and your external communication. So there's going to be this shifting going on where you're going to be trying to shift some communication. A lot of emotional stuff will come up around it, but there's a caution here with this moon. You don't always have a clear picture of reality. So if you look 6 months ago when the new moon was in Sagittarius, whatever was going on, if you put any energy, and even if you didn't, but what your focus was, is coming forward for this full moon into its fullness. So just remember, guys, when you have a new moon, it's when you want to make commitments, do goals, decide to make changes, put new things in. And the full moon will be what comes out of that from that new moon. So when the new moon was in Sagittarius, we're talking again 6 months ago, it came to fruition today. So the things going on in December, some part of that is coming up now based on what kind of decisions and where you were at that point. As always, I want to remind people that, you should be taking your charts out, looking to see where this affects you. A lot of times people, struggle with astrology. They say, oh, I read the newspaper and it didn't sound like me. Well, that's like saying you read the first chapter of War and Peace and you didn't get the story. With the astrology, there's so many levels, there's so many layers, there's so much stuff that when your chart is actually done and you're working with a talented astrologer, they will just tell you things that blow your mind. But it's layers and layers and layers. It's not just, well, what day of the year was I born? Oh, I'm a kafungal. Well, all kafungals are like this. Ain't how it works. And astrology gets a bad rap because of that, because people aren't willing to actually commit into understanding this process that you have 12 houses, 10 planets, aspects. And I always tell people, think of your astrology chart like a board of directors that's going on in your subconscious. And every one of those planets have an opinion, and they have certain strong opinions about certain areas of your life. And sometimes they're getting silenced, and sometimes they're getting elevated, and sometimes they're given a microphone. And as all of this is going on into your subconscious, and you can look at it, you can maybe start to identify some things and balance them out. Always remember, we call this planetary influence, this little first section, because this is not about giving your power away to astrology. Astrology is not going to tell you what to do. Astrology has been around for 3,500 years. And the stuff that they were doing and they came up with 3,500 years ago, if you look actually at the astronomy and the science part of it and all of these things, you're like, 3,500 years ago, they created this? Yes. And so it's more information with which to make better decisions. That's all astrology should be. It's going to tell you the astrological weather. That's what we're doing right now, is giving you the weekly weather forecast astrologically, and then you can lean into it, and it may help shift the decision one way or the other to kind of help you work with the weather. The other thing going on this week is we got the sun going into Gemini, and when the sun goes into Gemini, Gemini is mutable air. It's all about collecting data. It's all about kind of figuring things out. It's all about asking questions and wanting to, come to some different conclusions. During the time of Gemini, I keep on going back to Ashley's chart. It starts in your 9th house. You've had a lot of energy in your 9th house lately. Mm-hmm. That Gemini moon is there, and it's going to be asking you to collect data about your philosophies, about the institutions that formed you, about what doesn't work and who do you want to become now, or how do you want to change things. And this is a time where that journey is going to come right up to your midheaven, which is the face to the world. So these decisions you're making now, or these introspective thoughts you're having now, questioning, just because they said it, is it true?
Right.
Because it was the philosophy, or it was the religion, or it was the higher education. This is a time for questioning. And near the end of Gemini for you, Ashley, you will shift the face you show to the world depending on the data you collected. If you have an astrology chart you got online, one of those freebies, you might be able to hear this and say, okay, what does that mean? But if you're really clueless, it's not going to help you. If you have an astrology chart that somebody's done for you and you understand it, then you may be able to say, okay, so this is the part of my life it's going to affect. This is the area I want to look at. If for some reason you haven't done it, but you've always wanted to get an astrology chart, feel free to email me at kevin@kevinrossemery.com. Set up an appointment time. Know that I do the first astrology chart, and Ashley's had one done, so she knows. She's had several at this point. So Kevin@kevinrossemery.com. I will do your chart, your solar return, your progress chart. I'll explain it. And then every week you can tune into the radio show and you'll understand what I'm saying to give you more information with which to make better decisions.
It's definitely been helpful for me. It's sometimes it's fun to look at it, Monday morning quarterback after the fact and say, oh yeah, look at how that worked out. Should have seen that one coming. But it's also nice to help you make decisions about, should I do this now or next week? That kind of thing.
Yep.
So bring your umbrella.
The astrological weather.
The astrological weather.
Believe it or not.
Yeah. Yep.
Your lack of belief doesn't stop it from existing.
That is true. Exactly.
Okay. So I just got a note that said that this is okay.
That the Facebook.
Yep.
Facebook's being pesky as usual.
There we go. I'm trying to reconnect it.
Good job.
There you go. It's got reconnected. Love technology. Love technology. Love technology.
It's great when it works. Not so great when it doesn't.
So I've been getting a lot of great feedback on my stories. I've been doing a story every morning on Instagram and Facebook.
Oh, good.
It's just a little minute of something. Today I did change, like change is going to happen whether you want it to or not. And of course, today was the day I showed the new face, the new hair, the new everything,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I get to remind people either you master change, which is not control, because you can't control change, or change masters you. So, you get one or the other. Mastering change is much more about leaning in, accepting the journey, seeing how you can influence it, but also see why you needed it. How did it apply to my life? How can I make this a growth experience? How can I evolve? What is here? Because the change is going to happen whether you do it or not. And if you go la 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 la, you usually end up with 10 times more problems, because when you eventually do open it up, the change has happened. So
It's like the tide. It's happening.
yep, it's going to come in.
Yes.
So one last thing, and then we're going to bring on our guest and let you introduce
Okay.
tonight's superstar. I'm hoping our superstar is ready. I think they're having some small technical difficulties. Either that or they just get tired of hearing the sound of my voice.
I think it was the la 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 thing.
La 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 la. Oh. And they're shaking their head. I didn't want to hear what you had to say about change, because I want to do this when change comes and say, I have no control. I'm the victim. I'm sure I'll get comments on that. So I'm on the 4th day of my cleanse. No food for 4 days, just doing a liquid master cleanse.
Okay.
I try to do one once or twice a year. If going to change your oil, if you're going to change your fluids, you need to cleanse your body, because at this stage, I got more miles on my body than any car I ever owned.
How many days do you do your cleanse for?
I wait till I kind of get the feeling to go off of it. This may be my last day. I might go one more day. The maximum I've ever done on this cleanse is like 17 days.
Ugh.
No food,
17 minutes.
Just your cleanse, just your cleanse, your joy juice, I call it.
Okay.
And you let it, and it works. And though it's not to lose weight, I've dumped about 8 pounds in the 4 days. Though it's not meant to, it's supposed to help get your body back in line and be functioning and re-geared. But I always find that it gives me energy, believe it or not. I've been getting up at 4 to 4:30 in the morning without an alarm, and I've been like hyper all day long. And people are like, "You're not eating food?" No, I'm not. But when it's time to eat food, trust, I will have to eat it. Okay, so we're going to bring up today's guest, and I'm going to let you introduce him.
You bet.
We're going to, right off the bat, where you can find him. I'm hearing you, though I'm on a visual site. Go ahead.
All right, so today we are sitting with Dr. Greg Chasson. He is a licensed clinical psychologist, board-certified cognitive behavioral therapist, associate professor, and the director of behavioral interventions of the Obsessive Compulsive and Related Disorders Clinic in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neuroscience at the University of Chicago. That was a mouthful. And he has recently written a book called Flawed. And this book is what we're going to be talking a little bit about today, about perfectionism. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved your change quote, by the way, because I have a similar one that I think is of the same ilk or same spirit. I say, it's not about you taking control. It's about control not taking you. And I think it's a very similar sentiment.
Yep. Like minds think alike. And then you have you and I, loose train tracks, same thing.
Right.
So, Mr. Behavioral Therapist, what do you think of this behavior so far?
I could write a dissertation from just the last 10 minutes. No, I'm playing with you. It's entertaining. I can see why people like to tune in.
Yeah.
He's definitely entertaining. Love hanging out with him.
Yeah.
So, tell me, I've got the goodreads.com. I'm saying that's where they can get the book or read about the book. Do they get the book on your website? Before we even start, I want to kind of get that part of it out of the way.
Sure. Yeah, that's where they could go and be part of the community to talk about the book, to look at the book a little bit more, to learn more about it, and to find links to purchase it. You could go to flawedbook.com, which is a bit of a funny URL for a perfectionism book, flawedbook.com.
Yes.
And that will land you on the page that will give you more information.
So flawed, like FLUB?
Flawed, 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 like we're all flawed.
Flawed, like my hearing.
Yeah.
Flawedwhat.com?
Flawedbook.com.
Okay. Flawedbook.com. Oh, okay. The name of the book. If you, in your dissertation about your experience here, definitely you can mention that I was born blonde and the gray is just, like trying to hide the fact.
No problem. I'm sure it's more about my articulation being flawed. So there you go.
Flawedbook.com. Okay. So I know a lot of this is towards business. And so I want to start by you kind of telling us like how you came to write this and what your point was. But I definitely want to make sure we spend some time for our audience to recognize how some of what you're doing could be helping them in their personal life as well. Though I know we have people that are listening that are business owners or business managers. If you're managing people, I'm going to assume, because your publicist didn't send me an advance copy, so I haven't read the book, I'm going to assume that they would find this helpful in managing people.
Not at all. It's a terrible book. I would stay away from it. Yeah, no, the book is geared towards managers and leaders in a business setting, but that's really, I think, where it starts. I think that people beyond the business setting would benefit from the greater lessons and the principles that are in there. I had to pick a lane. You can't write a book for everyone on the planet, and I really wanted to make sure that I provided a framework for understanding perfectionism in the book, but also some, I think, straightforward solutions and strategies that people can employ. And I think needed a little bit more of a finite group of people to target in order to really do that and to demonstrate. But I do think it would be fairly straightforward for somebody motivated to be able to read that and extrapolate it and understand how it would apply to their own situation. But yes, it's absolutely, if you're a business owner, a leader, heck, if you're a coach who coaches teams, if on the sports field, I think you could definitely glean a lot from the book.
Now, I find it interesting that you kind of said a coach who coaches sports teams.
Yep.
If you're somebody like in my many hats, don't ask me to put them all on or your interview will be over. That, if I go in and am doing my business catalyst hat, I may be working with up and down dynamics. I may be working with team building, stuff like that. But I ain't never done it on a pitcher's mound. Mm-hmm. But I heard you say, so is it more appropriate for athletics, or can it be used in, the management team of Starbucks or whoever?
Yes, both. It's the inclusive or, as they say. It's really both, I think. In sports is a great example of this. I've written a little bit about this in my mailing list if you wanted to join. I talk about the yips. I don't know if you've heard of the yips, but this is a condition, so to speak, or a problem that, for example, baseball players or football players will experience, where they get so in their head that they can't actually do the motion or the sport behavior anymore. So, Steve Sachs in the 80s couldn't throw from second base to third base because he got into his head. There was a kicker who couldn't make a single extra point kick for 4 or 5 kicks straight during a playoff game. I mean, you get into your head and you become so paralyzed by doing things correctly. And I like to give the analogy of, we could all tie our shoe and we could probably do it fairly quickly. But what if you had 10 million people watching you tie your shoe? You probably would get pretty stuck pretty quickly. And so I think sports is a good example where we see perfectionism play out, because these athletes are so extreme in the way that they do everything. And perfectionism by nature is extreme. And I think sports is a good, no pun intended, it's a good arena for thinking about perfectionism. Okay, pun was a little bit intended.
I was going to say, I wasn't born yesterday, maybe the day before, but not yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things here is, because you say that, and I think of things like musicians, performers, and sometimes it can be, I would think, correct me, and I have to tell you, I'm literally thinking of a Bewitched episode, which probably was before your time, so you may not even know what I'm talking about.
I know Bewitched.
Yeah.
Huh? I'm sorry, what did you say, Greg?
I'm familiar with Bewitched, and I've seen some episodes, but yes, definitely before my time.
Before your time, Ashley? Go ahead, say it.
Sadly, no. I
See, Greg, in this room, you're just a baby. If you've been feeling like you're getting old, you're suddenly young.
I'm feeling lively and invigorated. Thank you for that.
But there was an episode where somebody who was this like stellar violinist had accidentally their pants dropped in the middle of a performance in Carnegie Hall, and they went like 15 years without being able to step on stage with a violin. And so, you know, I know you're addressing perfectionism, but that same thing can happen because of a trauma. Would do you think? And I mean, and I know you're a behavioral psychotic, so does that? I mean, does any of that cross over, or is it just, or is there a crossover between trauma and perfectionism?
Yes, it's important to note that trauma isn't at the core of all the mental distress we might see, including perfectionism, but there is absolutely going to be a higher rate of anxiety and perfectionism among people who experience a trauma. So it is absolutely something to think about when you work with perfectionism, but it's important to know that perfectionism in general is not associated with trauma. So if there is somebody who's experiencing this, it doesn't mean that they've had a trauma.
For some people, the birth canal was a trauma, and they never got over it.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to go.
Right. Exactly. I think it might help for people to understand what perfectionism is, if you don't mind me sort of explaining it, because people might be listening going, what the heck is this guy talking about? Perfectionism is really a personality of sorts, a disposition where people tend to get extreme in their expectations of themselves and other people. And these extreme expectations are then joined with what's called cognitive rigidity, which is this inability to shift mindsets, to not be able to pivot and adapt when necessary. So you have these people pursuing these extreme expectations that are infeasible, and then they are unable to adapt when the evidence in the environment around them is telling them that they need to. And so this is very different from just having high expectations. A lot of people confuse that. High expectations are perfectly healthy and not what I'm referring to here. This is about the extreme expectations that go beyond just high expectations, plus the rigidity and the inability to pivot when necessary.
Miss Ashley, questions?
Well,
Augie.
One of the things that, and we talked off screen a little bit about it very briefly, was I'm curious about how that dovetails in with obsessive compulsive disorder. And I can see how it fits together. But I know that's something that you specialize in, but I think it's also mentioned in your book. So if you wanted to chat about how those go together too, that would be great.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, that's really how I got into the world of perfectionism. I mean, I also have experienced some of my own. So this journey of writing this book was both personal and professional. But really, the world of perfectionism just resonated with me when I started getting into the world of OCD back in grad school, where I learned about the OCD phenomena and thought, oh, this is really fascinating. We all have elements of this. And then perfectionism plays a role in this too, in that a lot of people perfectionism doesn't have to have OCD, and OCD doesn't have to have perfectionism. If you think about a Venn diagram, there is a large subset in the middle that experience both. But really, people get really stuck trying to make things perfect, and it feels very much like a compulsive behavior like you would see in OCD. And they tend to get preoccupied, much like an obsession in OCD. Now, there are some differences, and it's really complicated in some respects, but I treat this as very similarly to how I would treat OCD. Now, not all perfectionism needs treatment. It's not all a psychiatric disorder or mental health condition. In fact, my book really targets people that are not that extreme, because those folks often don't even stay in a job very long. They get so stuck. This is really for that middle group where it's just enough to cause problems in the workplace, but not so extreme that they can't even stick around the workplace. But the people that do really have extreme cases of perfectionism will come to my OCD clinic, where I will provide evidence-based treatment for them. And I was seeing this so much here at the University of Chicago. I'm sure you can imagine the type of individual that comes to school at the University of Chicago, or comes to be a faculty member here, or staff, and their family members. There's a genetic component to some of this. So really, I walked into a universe of perfectionism when I got here, and I just have people coming out of my ears looking for treatment. And I kept saying the same thing to these folks over and over and over again, to all these different people. And I thought, there's got to be a way to scale this. There's got to be a way to get the message out and to fight what I think is a growing toxic achievement culture and all of the perfectionism that comes with it.
I was going to ask you if you are seeing more of an influx, especially with some of the younger people, with God, everything that's been going on, and then with COVID. And I feel like, I have young adult children, and I see through them and through their friends and that kind of circle, just the pressure and this expectation. And I know there's the difference between the high achieving and setting higher goals and, wanting to be really good at it, and then this perfectionism that can actually, create crippling anxiety, and then just tossing it all out.
I absolutely. The research is actually pretty clear on this. Tom Curran has done some work in England on this, showing that there's been an increase in perfectionism in more recent cohorts of kids. So the farther you move away from the bewitched generation, the more perfectionism you end up getting. There you go, a little nose wiggle. And I think that there are lots of explanations for this, but we're not clear on which ones are the most robust. And my personal opinion is that social media plays a big role in this. You tend to see a massive increase in the slope of mental health distress and impairment around 2007, 2008, 2009. And raise your hand if you can think about something that may have happened around that time. Social media really started booming around that time. And so yes, it's not a correlation isn't causation, but I'm certainly skeptical and keeping that theory until I see some evidence of refuting it.
Well, I think that the boulder has been getting pushed up since the 1950s. And I think it reached the top, and social media was when the boulder went down.
Interesting.
Because I speak on something called culture abuse. And when did our culture start abusing us? And it's really clear that it started abusing us right after World War II. And you see Madison Avenue get into bed with pharmaceuticals, with all the stuff, because the only way Madison Avenue gets paid is if they sell you a product. They only sell you a product if they create a need. So in the 50s, we started having these perfect models and these perfect situations that people would see and be like, well, why can't I be like that? So that they could sell you anything and everything. And so we started to see this self-destruction of self-worth and self-esteem that definitely was going up the hill. And then, we look at social media and FOMO, and people alter things and they only look perfect on their social media, or they, but let's face it, social media, Madison Avenue was jury rigging and graphically enhancing. So you could never be that thin. You could never be that beautiful. You could never be that perfect. And I think that definitely is a large player. Thoughts?
Agreed. I don't know about the historical context of the Sisyphus with the boulder up the last generation, but I could imagine that. Look, it sounds reasonable to me, and the idea that social media is the instant feedback. It's instant feedback. It's curated, right? So everything looks great. I love the trend not too long ago where women in particular were putting photos out on some of the social media without their makeup on, or putting pictures out there without airbrushing their bodies. And I'm thinking that is the exception, and it requires a movement to do that. So this is an uphill battle. It's a upstream swim, and it's so challenging because everything before you is just perfectly curated. And if everyone is upwardly comparing themselves to that, they're going to feel awful all the time.
So you're in Chicago. You're located in Chicago?
Yes.
I'll be there in August. If you want to have a drink, let me know.
Yeah, great.
He's like, are you kidding? I can't wait to be done with this interview.
No.
Tell us, can you give us a little bit of a peek at some of the things that you suggest, whether it's in the workplace and, and obviously I know, I mean, one of the reasons when your agent reached out to me and said, would you like to have him on your show? I read it and I said, yep, absolutely. Because I saw the crossover. Yep. So can you give us some of those like hints or tips enough that they'll be frustrated and have to buy the book?
Right. Just a teaser.
Yeah, just tease us, Greg.
I'm going to tease you. Yeah. So the book is actually chock full of ideas, some of which might be harebrained and some of them are based on evidence-based and I think are useful. The ones that I really would stand behind are the ones based on exposure therapy principles, which essentially is the standard way to approach anxiety in general. In the case of perfectionism, it's about having people face the things that are so terrifying for them. They're often engaging in a ton of really unfortunate behavior that gets in the way to avoid dealing with anxiety. So they might seek a ton of reassurance from their boss or from the people around them. Like, does this look okay? How does this look? Do you think they're going to like this? Or they might engage in a considerable amount of checking and fixing so that they're going over the same email 30 times before they send it. These kinds of behaviors, and I call them safety behaviors. That's what we call it in my area. And avoidance and procrastination is probably the biggest one. Stick your head in the sand and do it tomorrow is a very easy way not to worry about or deal with your anxiety right now. And so all of these things have a dramatically impairing effect on the workplace or in a marriage or in a family dynamic or on a very successful radio show. And so you get to the impact is right there. And how do you face it? Well, one of the strategies is to face the anxiety. What are they so anxious about? Making mistakes, looking like an imposter, not being able to do what's required of them. And so what do? I will have them make mistakes. I will have people make mistakes on purpose so that they can challenge their anxiety around this, see that they can handle it, learn that it's not as catastrophic as they think it is, and do this over and over and over again in a controlled, systematic way with full consent. I would never do this to anyone without their consent. That's called torture, by the way. And just really putting people into anxiety-provoking situations. And we just sort of grow from there and have them do this. It works. It works like gangbusters, and it helps people overcome their anxiety. And perfectionistic anxiety is no different. So that's one strategy, right? Other strategies revolve around just loosening people's inflexible thinking. They're so rigid, people with perfectionism, and trying to get them to learn how to pivot and shift, and building in random chance and unpredictability into the work environment is an absolute terrible anxiety for these folks. Like, can you come in and hand them a schedule that is completely at random that day? So from the moment they fill their coffee, they have no idea what's coming next. Most people hate that idea. Perfectionists would probably quit over that idea, right? But if you can get them to do this with consent and they do this over and over again, they start to learn how to be a little bit more fluid in their daily operations. So these are just some examples of how you can work with someone with perfectionism. And I do some from the bottom up. Some of those strategies are bottom up. How do you work with a perfectionistic worker? But a lot of the strategies are also top down. How do you create a culture that isn't promoting perfectionism? there are a lot of things that employers do that really send a message of this needs to be perfect, and we are not going to deviate from the plan, even if the data suggests we should. And the mission and vision statement is all about perfection, or being optimal, without the idea that maybe it's efficiency is maybe a better value to be thinking about, or at least balancing it with efficiency. So there are a lot of ways from the top down that the culture can be influenced, from orientation day to the job hiring ad to the way that you reward people in the business environment, right? If you have a whiteboard where all the top sellers are getting gold stars and bonuses, yet everyone else is watching these people get this, the idea is, oh, this is motivating. But then you have the crowd in the back who's busted their tail and they're super demoralized and they don't want to be there, right? So there's a lot of things that an environment can do to reduce the perfectionism.
I mean, sometimes you have to look at optimal results. And the optimal result is always going to happen when you have the engaged employee that actually feels some ownership.
Mm-hmm.
They can't feel ownership if you're basically, whether you're communicating it in action or writing or just these things, these things you're talking about, that you're somehow not good enough.
Right.
They get enough of that on social media and on television commercials, and
right.
And now we have multi-generational wounding that comes down. And
right.
so, yeah, optimal results. How do you get it? You get the people on board.
Yeah, you get them to buy in and to feel like they're a part of it and that they value it. You get the organization to push this idea of values-based action. What's important to you as a human being, as an employee and a human being? And then how do we connect that with the values of the organization? And then how can we create expectations that are consistent with those values? How do we move away from rules, which are so rigid and draconian sometimes? And how can we instead focus on the principles that underlie some of those rules, right? And for the people that don't maybe feel the difference between those, I like to give a really silly example. Imagine you're at a pool and you see a rule that says no running near the pool, don't run near the pool. I think we've all heard that before, right? But what's the principle underlying that? Well, pools are dangerous. When it's wet, it's slippery. Don't kill yourself, right? And the value, of course, is safety. And what if the lifeguard is so rigid about the rules that he's whistling and yelling at a mom running to save a drowning child in the pool, right? That's the idea of someone so rigid and stuck on the rules that it's undermining the entire point of that rule in the first place, which is safety. And I know it's a silly example, but that happens all the time in a workplace. People get so stuck on the rules that sometimes it undermines the principle.
Well, but oftentimes in the workplace, and I've worked for myself for 34 years now, but I had my stint in the workplace, usually in management positions of some kind. People can use the rules to beat people, to
Absolutely.
try to control them. And I've created a lot of training programs and implemented them and done stuff like this. And what I find, and I want to hear what your experience of this statement is, it comes back oftentimes to a lack of teaching people the critical thinking skills associated with your business.
Mm-hmm.
Because kids, you work at a university, and maybe it's changed, but I worked at a university once upon a time, a long time ago, before you were born. Get out of my face. And the kids do not come out of public education with good critical thinking skills. In fact, most of the time, they don't even know what critical thinking skills are.
Yeah, they know how to calculate the angles of a triangle, though.
That is so funny, because this week I was working with one of my ADD, ADHD high school students, because I have several books that are on ADD, ADHD, and I work a lot with that in that population. And she was coming up to her final, and it was in geometry, and she couldn't get certain triangle things down. Now, I was not ever a geometry major. It was not my thing, but I made her read it, and we critically thought into a way that have the language that she could understand how it was repetitive, but I made her think about it and stuff like this. And she was like, oh my God, I get it. I'm waiting to see how she did on her test, but yeah, no critical thinking skills. And so you go into, so that's why everybody like Lemming are looking for rules, because they don't know how to think through what is the correct action.
Yeah, they've lived their life by rules. It's sort of been the safety blanket for a lot of people for a long time. And I do think employers probably take advantage of that, probably for some good, right? Getting people to have predictability. I mean, rules are there for a reason. I wouldn't say we should have no rules. I just think that we need to, again, I agree with you. Critical thinking, when are the rules just a suggestion? Because otherwise you are violating the principles that drove those rules in the first place. Or maybe there's a bigger principle or value at work here that we need to be respecting. And yeah, critical thinking is a concern that I've had forever. And I think some of the best teachers, the best courses, the best institutions are the ones that really push this, because just do a little bit of research. You'll find that the half-life of knowledge is extremely tiny. So after 5 or 10 years, knowledge is obsolete. And so we're teaching all this information, and then 5 or 10 years later, it's completely useless. If the kids are not leaving with some critical thinking skills, then what's the point?
Ash, you had a question or something you want to comment?
I am just agreeing with you. I think that it's a problem that's starting in this lower education and needs to follow the students all the way up. And I think that's probably the limitation with some of these employers is they don't have the critical thinking skills, so they can't expect their employees to have them.
I think there's probably a little bit of anxiety around the idea that employees might start thinking for themselves, God forbid. And, I actually think that that's probably a catastrophic way of thinking. That's not true. I think if you get people thinking for themselves, they're going to be more innovative. They're going to be more loyal and interested in helping the mission. I don't know. Having mindless foot soldiers, to me, does not a successful environment make, in my opinion. But some organizations swear by it.
What if that sign at the pool said, if you run and slip, you have to clean up your own blood? Would that make people stop and think twice and maybe go, ooh.
Yeah,
we can say it, that what we don't want. We don't want to have to clean up your blood off the pool.
Yeah. Well, that's where we maybe make assumptions about critical thinking. Maybe people aren't thinking, why is this rule here? But I think the hope is that people would be able to draw that connection, but maybe they need something more explicit. Like, here's a shovel for the brains that come out of your head when you hit the concrete, right? I know that's really significant, but maybe people need that kind of imagery or that kind of language to understand the underlying principle.
If you're trained as a lemming, you walk off the cliff.
Yeah.
And it amazes me, one of the largest parts of my practice these days in the last few years, especially since social media, is I have parents paying me to teach their adult children how to actually how to live in life.
Right.
Like 20-something-year-olds, I was like, I knew that at 14. Like, this is just common sense. The most uncommon thing you'll ever find, which is hand in hand with critical thinking skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give us one more example before we thank you and send you on your way.
Well, one more example from the book that I think is important to mention is that perfectionists are not evil. They're not to be vilified. This is not a witch hunt. I also talk in the book about leveraging perfectionists' strengths, and there are many of them. So this is not meant to weed out perfectionists. It's about how do we reduce the damage that might come from perfectionistic messaging and behavior in the workplace, and then how can we maximize some of the good qualities that come with perfectionism. And those include things like loyalty. They tend to be quite loyal. Honesty, tend to be some of the most honest people you've ever met, which is great for a workplace. They tend to be extremely hardworking because they have to triple down on everything, right? So they've learned how to be the hardest working person in the room. They're detailed oriented, like nobody's business. So if you need an employee or a manager who is going to look at the details, the perfectionist is your go-to, right? And lastly, they tend to be the most conscientious person in the room. And I have to tell you, if there's one ingredient I would choose to bake an employee, it would be conscientiousness.
And I think that, again, all of those qualities are qualities that you would want to think about in a slide way to your to your spouse, to your to your family, to your friendships, that because we all have friends that are perfectionists who we get a little irritated with, and then we say, "Are you OCD?" And they're really not, but their perfectionism will kind of show up. So we've got a book. Is there any other way? I mean, we've been trying to make sure that people know how to get in touch with you. Are you have any speaking engagements coming up? Are you going to be doing any kind of workshops on this? Like, how does this unfold for you in the future that we can share with our audience?
Yeah, sometimes I wish I could just wiggle my nose and everything will be right there in front of me. But a lot of this is just gearing up. The book just came out about 4 or 5 weeks ago. I hope it resonates with people and builds up some momentum. But yeah, I'm hoping to do some work with organizations who are looking for some strategies for dealing with this and increasing their productivity and efficiency. I think once people read the book, they'll understand how perfectionism is probably dampening their productivity and efficiency. So I'd love to get into some organizations and work with them. And I'm also very interested in doing some speaking for organizations that are interested, associations, things like that. I will at some point, as soon as I can, get to it, is put some workshops and other types of webinars and trainings together so that I can help, again, scale the message. I really, that's my main goal, is to help people step outside of this belief system and get them to see that there's another way.
Any last thoughts or questions, Ashley?
No, I will thumb through the book for sure. I am intrigued. So congratulations on having it come out, and Flawed.
Yes, thank you.
Flawed. You can find it at flawedbook.com. Down the road, you get some other stuff going on, some other energy. Feel free to reach out and let us know, and we'll do an update with you down the road when more of these pieces are moving. Unless you're like, oh God, no.
No, I would be delighted. That I appreciate the invitation.
So I'm going to leave you with this. So I always work with my clients in the work I do about evolving perfection, and try to move them to the concept of evolving perfection, which is learning how to be perfectly present in the moment. And then you are perfect as you can be. So it's perfect. So it's really not giving your energy away to the future or to other people. Just be present, be your best. Then you are perfect. Because I don't know. Yep. So,
I mean, you're offering I think a flexible view of perfectionism, whereas somebody that struggles with this would say, like, how do I do that? And then they would get upset that they can't do that. And then they would get, preoccupied with the fact that they're not doing it right. And then it's just
Well, I probably deal with more people who feel like they want to be more perfect than people who think they're perfect. But even with the perfect people, there are ways to work with it. Greg, flawedbook.com. And so one last comment for you. So before you said it was chock full, all I could hear was chock full of nuts. Are you saying these people are nuts?
I am 100% not saying that they're nuts. If that is the message that I am sending, then I should just hang up my headphones now. And as imperfect as I am, I hope that message is not being conveyed. I think, again, some of the perfectionists are some of the strongest rock stars in your workplace. And this is not a mental health issue until it becomes one, and then come see me. And there are tons of people that can treat this. I have resources on my website that you can get if you're looking for help.
So I'm hoping you both got the reference. Chock full of nuts coffee, that heavenly.
Yes.
You said chock full of nuts, and all I could think of was chock full nuts. Is he saying they're nuts?
No, definitely.
It's not.
Definitely not. No.
Yeah. Wow.
Greg, thanks for coming, and we look forward to getting an update somewhere down the road of how things are going.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Greg.
Bye.
Bye. Chock full of nuts. I could picture the can as soon as you said it, though.
I recently had a can in my thing, my cupboard. Chock full of nuts, that heavenly flavor.
Yes.
Song.
Yes. Well, that was very interesting. Yeah, I like the idea of thinking about it in different ways, not just the workplace, although I know that's the focus of this book. But I think that application could be put in many different situations, like relationships.
And, one of the things is that we are, I talked about the whole concept of critical thinking skills.
Yeah.
People can read this book and apply their critical thinking skills to how this book applies in their life, even if they're not a major manager, if they're not, they don't manage people, or they're not in that position, whatever it is, this book, and this is why I wanted to have him on a guest, is everybody knows what it's like to deal with a perfectionist. I mean, of some kind, of some ilk, of something.
Yep.
And so I think that this is the perfect, I think that this is why I like to bring things like this on, though people go, hey, it's a spiritual show. Why are you talking about something that has to do with something in business? Well, it's all related. It's all holistic.
Yeah.
And, so that's why we do it.
Practical.
Don't come back.
Spiritual
advice.
Yeah.
So, do you have any anything coming up?
Oh, geez. Anything coming?
I'm always putting you on the spot. I always ask.
I know.
I'm going to ask the question.
I've got some stuff brewing. Nothing that I'm really ready to present to the ethers right now. They're still cooking. How about you? How was SIP on Sunday? I was very sad to miss it. It was a karma discussion, correct?
It was karma discussion. It was really good.
Good.
And we probably quadrupled or more our numbers of viewers by doing it, because we now do it live streaming.
Right, as opposed to having to get the link and all of that. So that's great.
And so, that we got a lot more interaction. We got a lot more follow-up. I think that, and we're still getting it. And we're also putting it on, where it goes out through all the podcasts,
Podbean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the way that we do this, I am having a problem with technology.
Oh dear.
And but I just lost everybody. Oh, there we go.
I see you.
Okay. Well, good. I'm glad. You probably saw a confused look on my face.
Good.
So
A little bit.
good. We're going to be doing another sip in June on what is spiritual abuse. We're going to try that one on a Monday night.
Yeah, I'm curious to see which night will be a better fit for people to tune in. Although it's nice because you don't have to watch it live. You can always catch it later. But live gives you that opportunity to chime in and ask questions and make comments and all that good stuff.
So the other thing, which I'm typing, which is why I seem a little distracted, and I apologize because I didn't get a chance to do this before because we had another technical difficulty we were working with before we got on air.
Yes.
The fun of live is that this stuff happens. But this weekend, I am also going to be doing readings at Gigi Psychic and Healing Fair, Newburyport Elk Club from Newburyport, Mass. So if anybody is in the area and they're looking like they'd like to sit across the table and get some everything psychic readings from me, that's where you'll find me on Sunday, 11 to 4. Newburyport is gorgeous, and it's a great place to just spend the day over Memorial Day weekend. And you just swing by the fair, and then you go down to the water, and you shop to Newburyport and all of that stuff.
I love Newburyport. That's a beautiful place to spend the day. So good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So we're going to, so I was trying to type that in because I got on early to type it in, and then we had a technical problem, and then I went right into the show. And so I'm like, oh,
good catch.
Making sure I have all the information going on. If you want to connect up with Ashley, give us your minute elevator speech. Tell people what they get out of catching up with Ashley at solsticeintuitivearts.com.
Yeah, I am available for healings. I'm available for soul readings. If somebody wants to know what their next steps are and they get a little bit stuck, I'm able to communicate with their soul, their higher self, and kind of show them some pathways in front of them. I never say what to do, but I will show them some opportunities that their soul wants to present. So and all of that is, like the readings that you do, the Everything Psychic, everything that we do has a healing component. So just helping people to be better selves. So
great. And you can contact her. You can go over to solsticeintuitivearts.com.
Yes, right there. Or
I have it running at the bottom of the screen.
This one's for kevinrossemery.com.
Yes. So if you're looking for the psychic sledgehammer, you can have an everything psychic reading either at the fair or over the phone at Kevin, and you can sign up for all of those at kevinrossemery.com. Or if you're looking to take your next step in your spiritual journey, I work with clients that come in with a lot of things, whether I'm working with them from the medical intuitive perspective or the trauma perspective. I'm always working with them to become their next best self. And I always remind people to heal means to make whole. That's all it means. And so when I help you in your journey of healing, I'm just making you more of who you are.
It's a beautiful way to put it. I fumbled on it. You said it nicely.
Next week.
Next week.
Stacey Christopher. You want to take a second and tell us something? Because Stacey is one of yours before we sign off.
Yep. Stacey is just a beautiful person, and she's an amazing animal communicator. So she's going to, among other things, but I think that's what we're going to be looking at this next Thursday. And but she is an amazing medium to animals and to people, and just a beautiful soul. So I look forward to Stacey being with us.
Great. Well, You guys have a great week. Take advantage of the weather forecast. If perfection bothers you or somebody else in your life and you're trying to learn how to deal with them better, You know, go over to flawedbook.com, check it out. And if you are so led by spirit, you know, get yourself a copy of the book. Outside of that, we're going to be here Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
We'll see you then.
Namaste.
Namaste. Have a good week. Bye.